Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of Zameen Zaban. In this episode, I'm really delighted to host a very special conversation that takes us into an important but unfortunately often overlooked part of Afghanistan history and society. Today, we will explore the history of the Sikh and Hindu communities of Afghanistan and their diaspora. Basically, we will talk about how they were perceived and categorized by the state and society and academic research, how political events like war, migration, and exile have shaped their identity and sense of belonging to their country. Today, our guest is Puja Kaur Matta, a PhD candidate at the Doctoral College for Intersectionality and for Intersectionality Studies and Religious Studies at the University of Bayreuth. Ms. Kaur Matta research focuses on the lives of Sikh and Hindu community of Afghanistan and Afghanistan diaspora in Europe. As I earlier stated, despite the Sikh and Hindu community living like other ethnic community for centuries in Afghanistan, unfortunately, they're overlooked. Their history is overlooked. The academic research is very limited about them and often misunderstood, and they are labeled. They are misunderstood through stereotypes in their own country and even for the outside world. Pujajan, as someone who has extensively researched the Sikh and Hindu communities of Afghanistan and their diaspora, from your research, how can we better understand their place and history within their own country?
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me. I think it's wonderful what you're doing, bringing in dialogue, talking to each other, because that is what has been missing a lot.
It's such an honor to have you.
So historically, I'm an Afghan Sikh, and let me start by telling you a little bit about how things work for me. So usually people come to me, I grew up in Germany, and I always get the question, where are you from, right? And let's leave out the question coming from the white society, but let's look into what it happens. So when I am asked by Afghan people, where are you from? And I say, I am Afghan, I'm from Kabul. I was born in Kabul. My parents grew up in Kabul. They always say, oh, but you're not Muslim, right? Because your name is Puja. Because a lot of people know the name Puja because of Hindi movies, obviously. It's a very popular name in South Asia. And I say, no, my parents never migrated from India to Afghanistan. We are natives. And the answer I usually get, well, you're Afghans, you're still a human to me, which is not a really nice thing to do. And on the other side, when people from other South Asian countries approach me and they know Puja Kaur, Kaur is also very popular name or widespread in North India, they always also assume that I am from there. And when I correct them, no, I'm Afghan, and they say, oh, you're Afghan, but you're a Sikh, right? Or Hindu. And I say, yes. And the answer is also again, oh, you're Afghan, but you're still a human to me, And that is very frustrating. It is, this, you're still a human to me is a very dehumanizing way, trying to understand something that there's nothing to understand. I'm just a human, and you do not need to announce to me that I am a human. Let's meet on this level. So what I have come across, you have always this stereotype to, oh, you're from North India, but you don't look like Afghan. Your religion doesn't go to Afghanistan. You must have migrated to Afghanistan. Are you like, what is your history? What is your background? And from there, you try to understand why is it? And that was more my question. My question wasn't like, who am I? I know who am I. I know my parents, they have told me their childhood. I have contact to my grandparents and the wider community. So I'm not shaken by this. But what interested me in my research is more like, why do people label me as not Afghan? Why they always say, oh, Afghan Sikhs, they must be from India, migrated from India. Or why is that my name, Puja, tells people that I cannot be Muslim? Why is it so much associated with a specific religious background, right? And why do people do this? So that's how I got into my studies, but also I learned that there's a huge lack of literature on Afghan Sikhs. And it didn't make sense to me because from what I've known, how my parents grew up, and I grew up with these stories, there was a big population in Afghanistan. They told me always, yeah, they used to live in Kabul, in Shor and then they moved to Kartaparwan, and they were like everywhere Afghans. There were Sikhs and Hindus, and they lived there. So it didn't make sense that there's no literature about it. I started to look and realized, oh, we don't have a history, not a history that is, acknowledged in the wider sphere of academia or popular culture. So I have been doing some research, if I may speak a little longer, and I looked into, okay, what is Afghanistan actually? Right? What does it mean to be an Afghan? And I decided to start my research with the colonialization of South Asia by the British East Indian Company first, and then later the British Crown, and realized, okay, the Afghan national state as we know it today, with its borders, was designed by the British. So Afghanistan as a national state, as a central state, appears on the maps in the early 20th century. And before that, if you think about it, and I've traced some histories, I've traced some people, migration, people before the British came, there weren't these hard-drawn borders. People moved to, migrated, came and went. People, there was war and conquest, of course, but there was also, people bringing stuff from one place to another, like, these stories about the Afghanistan, the anar, the grenade apple, traveling all the way to Bangladesh. They were very, very famous. Afghanistan's fruit was very famous in India in Mughal times even. People would eat it and love it. And but people, when people move, they just don't bring things from one place to another. People bring their whole humanity. And that is their languages, that is their religion, that is their culture, and also their families. And people decide for different reasons to stay in one place or to move. But what I can say from my research is that when the British, on the one side, there was this Iranian border that was run mostly by the Russian Empire back then. And then what I'm looking is this Durand line when the British drew this line. And that changed a lot. Suddenly, people can't move anymore, right? They are stuck in a place. Then you need permissions, you need passports, visas, but then you need to get a passport. How do you make a passport? Who gets to have a passport? What does it mean? And suddenly you're told you're Afghan. People didn't know that word in the early 20th century, right? It was a word rarely used. I asked my grandma, she said, it came later. Before that, people used to call it the region of Khorasan. And my grandma said, yeah, well, Khorasan, she doesn't know what it really means, was a textile, she told me. That's how she knows it. But these concepts of nation state, borders, first of all, these are discussions among elite, just a very particular group of people. And secondly, they're not natural. People have moved and migrated all their lives, and suddenly you're stuck. And I'm sure you know many stories about Pashtunistan and the conflict about uniting Pashtunistan. There's this. Then you have this ongoing conflict about Punjab, which has been divided between Pakistan, what is today Pakistan, and what is today North India. But prior to that, people moved, and a lot of these conflicts could be, in my opinion, avoided by erasing the borders, because borders are not natural. They are enforced by a state. And that state has a particular interest. And the question is, it's not enough when you look at how empires work. And if we consider, because Afghanistan was colonized by the British, by their proxy, and how do empires become big and how do they enforce their power? It's not only borders and armies. What they need is also a change of culture. So they start thinking like, okay, what could be this culture of this particular region? Like, look at Germany, right? The German culture is speaking German. You talk about eating bratwurst, wearing lederhosen, etc. And the same concept that came from Europe is now applied to South Asia. So you start saying, okay, this is typical Afghan, this is typical this, and then you declare the religion. This is why I come also from religious studies, why I do religious studies, is you declare a state religion. And then it was declared that Sunni Islam is a state religion. And you would just tell the people who are in Afghanistan that you are now Sunni, even though people didn't know what that exactly means because they had different ways of practicing. They said, okay, and some didn't, which were the Shia Hazare, and they were othered. There was a lot of violence because of that, justified because you're different, you're the other. And then you have the Afghan Hindus and Sikhs who are not directly the other, but they're something beneath it. They're made invisible because you're Sikh or Hindu. That means you belong to India, because India is now the country or the nation state where religious diversity exists, but not in Afghanistan. So you're made invisible. You're told you're othered to maintain the power of the empire.
Just you already told that since you are you grew up here and you face this kind of question that when you said that you are from Afghanistan, it was kind of surprising to say that you are from Afghanistan because of your name, your last name, your ethnicity, your religion. But do you think it's only the outside world that perceive you as not someone from Afghanistan, or it as its roots in the country, in the like state policy?
Yeah.
Basically, that to somehow make you invisible, somehow corner you in the side, somehow the legal system, the state policy to somehow show you as an outsider, I would say, distinct you from the other ethnic group. Where this kind of perspective come from? Because I came across some research. They were referring to the Sikh and community, the Sikh and Hindu communities of Afghanistan as Indian merchant, as Indian trader, as long-lasting community. Why just do not simply see them and study them as an ethnic groups like any other ethnic groups that are living in Afghanistan? Where this perspective basically come from?
That is a really good question. And it goes back to what I was referring to the empire. So, like, when you want to build a nation state, what you need is first of all borders. You need a nation state needs always territory, right? So you created this border. This is, by the way, also the same time when early 20th century under British, Afghanistan was cut off from the ocean, from the sea, right? Before then, the Afghans had access, and now suddenly it's gone because there's the Iran and Pakistan, and they have a very straight border through that. And suddenly, Afghanistan doesn't have these trade networks with the ocean anymore. I mean, the travel is generally very difficult. You know, Afghanistan is a very mountainous region, so traveling is difficult, but a port, an entry port to the ocean is very important for trade. But anyway, they cut it off. So you can already, because if you look at the maps prior to that, you can see the Afghan region was much bigger and sometimes again smaller, depending on who was in power, which kingdom was there, right? You had a Delhi Sultanate time. You had Raja Ranjit Singh, who was a Sikh ruler, and his rule was until Kabul. It also had Lahore in it and went to Kabul too. And then this all came down and the British took over. So what do the British do and what is different from the other kingdoms? So that is my research question has been a lot on thinking what is different about British colonialization compared to other kingdoms. And the difference is that the British colonialism coming from European philosophies and thoughts brings in the concept of nation state that was not there prior. And it tells you that a nation needs an essence, it needs an identity, right? Because before that, people didn't have these static identities. You wouldn't tell someone not that much. I mean, there were wars based on religion, of course, I don't want to deny that. But it was like more affluent, you could change a lot more. People wouldn't care. There were also times and periods of peace, and people wouldn't care about your religion. If you speak the same language, that was it. You needed to trade with them or not. Cultural exchange, there were universities, anyone could come or have different systems. So what the British changed is that you need a static identity, and that comes from a European philosophy. So when you create a static identity, you tell people then in the colonized Afghanistan that they have now an identity, and the identity is Afghan. It's being a man mostly, and you're Sunni Muslim. So everyone, these are the top, and rich, of course, best part. That is a true Afghan, and everyone is below. And then you make the Shia Hazare the other. So you can justify violence against them, and most importantly, take their land. So it was and using the humans for your own purpose, justifying them, denying them human rights because they are not humans. And the Sikhs and the Hindus, they suddenly don't belong in this complex society anymore. They are out of that society. They are like non-existent. And now you have to explain why are they here? Because they don't belong here anymore. Because you said Afghanistan is an Islamic country, so everyone who's non-Muslim doesn't belong to this country. So you'd start stereotyping them and claim that they are other. They must be from Hindustan. They must be foreigners. They must be aliens to this country, not natives. And when you do this, then you can exploit these people and you can take their land. And we have seen in the past 20 years that the NATO exactly this playing out. So I'm not an expert exactly on how the NATO mission went, but I can tell you this, that when the countries that so-called allies of the West came together here in Germany, 2001, in December in Bonn, to decide about the new nation state of Afghanistan, they employed the old colonial playbook. They decided together, not asking the Afghan population at all, not having anyone, just inviting some elites in, bring them together to a table, and they decide, oh, Afghanistan needs to be an Islamic Republic. So what does an Islamic Republic mean? Is that everyone who's not Muslim cannot be a president. Anyone it's written in the constitution, you can look it up, cannot be a minister, cannot hold a big office. So that is discrimination in itself, again, repeated what was already done during the British imperialism. And when you're the other, you justify violence. And this is what I have been reading over and over again. You justify everyday violence. You justify taking their land. There was a lot of land grabbing in the past 30, 40 years. You justify killing them. You justify not giving these people dignity. And that has been the biggest issue. because we are human beings and you just deny humanity. What I've learned from doing interviews is that in the 70s, there were, like in the urban area, we can say that Sikhs and Hindus did experience discrimination, but the everyday life wasn't as difficult as it turned out to be in the past 20 years. Because during the NATO, it was then when the most violent happened, like bombings of the ICs, abductions, everyday little bombs happening. These things also happened during the wartime, but the past 20 years were really high scale. So it is, when you consider Afghanistan and the NATO, they are replaying the old empire playbook. You need a nation and you need to give the nation a religious identity. So you can justify dehumanizing everyone else. This is how you keep up power.
Thank you so much. I think we already talked in detail about how this colonialistic policy in the region shaped the Indo and Sikh and Hindu communities of Afghanistan identity, and how these policy and agenda make somehow them invisible and marginalize them. Just could you briefly talk about Afghanistan state policy along the history, how they legalized discrimination, and how the structural discrimination affected and impacted the Hindu and Sikh community? You talked about land grabbing, you talked about how, I don't know, maybe if you found any evidence about other ethnic group harassing them and somehow somehow force them to leave their houses, their properties behind. Could you please talk about the structural violence that imposed by the Afghanistan state on them, and how they legalized the discrimination and violence along the history? Like I read some incidents like Habibullah that forced them to sell a temple to him because he just wanted to have a place for vacation. Incident like that. Unfortunately, as we already mentioned, the research are very limited, and I'm not an expert about Hindu and Sikh history. So could you please talk about the internal factor, all the discrimination that imposed by the Afghanistan state and society on Sikh and Hindu communities?
Yes. So I'm used to talk very abstract also in my PhD. So you have to, say, please be more concrete, or because I'm used to talk very abstract level. If you can't follow me, just tell me if I'm too abstract. But yeah, you're right. Good that you know this history about Habibullah. So when we just chronologically, like how history unfolds, talk about this. So let me give you first an example. When people say, no, Afghanistan has been always Islamic or Muslim, right? Everyone knows the Buddha statues of Bamyan. Aren't they the best example of showing you that this region was always multi-diverse, multi-religious, multilingual, right? And these are the big famous statues which are unfortunately gone. And it's really hard to, that we don't see that. That really hurts my heart. But there are also, of course, other temples, really, really old Hindu temples, very old synagogues of the Jewish community, very old Buddhist temples across the country, everywhere. A lot have been destroyed due to war. And just by looking at them, you know that the history of Afghanistan has always been more diverse than we are told. it has always been, you know, I know it's a troubled region, but we should also always look into the times of peace when exchange happened. Mostly from a Western perspective, we're told to just look at Afghanistan, at this, you know, this region, always war happening, always conflict. That's not true. That's just one side of the history. The other is this immense exchange of philosophers, of thoughts, of thinking, people giving each other, you know, and very potent, creating potent philosophies. So, for example, the first guru of the Sikhs, the Guru Nanak, also known, some Afghans know Baba Hazrat Nanak, very, very famous. That he was traveling through Afghanistan as well. It wasn't Afghanistan, right? So it was, I'm talking 16th century, so it's not that long ago. He traveled this area with his companions. One was a Hindu, one was a Muslim. And his way was very, you know, resonating with Sufi poetry. So he traveled, and this is why you have near Kabul or Jalabad still very historic Gurdwaras. You have old historical Gurdwaras in Iran. You have them in Iraq because that's where he traveled. And people, local people, know their stories. People know, oh yeah, Hazrat Nanak, we know. And when I tell you the story of Afghan Hindus and Sikhs, I'm also telling you a history of Afghanistan and what we had. We had immense poetry. We had a lot of people coming and going, a lot of exchange, lots of ideas, inventions, a lot of circulation. And we have to look at that history as well. And for me, Baba Nanak, being the first Sikh guru, but also a very important historical figure for that region, tells this story, you know, the story of giving everyone humanity, fighting against patriarchy, advocating for radical equality, like no more discrimination based on religion, no more discrimination based on caste, because caste was very prevalent, no more discrimination based on gender. That was very important, gender equality, you know. And a lot of people followed him. Like, it didn't matter their religious background. And he walked and teach, and always, this is very important, he sat with the people down, the local population. He listened to them, and he was always in a dialogue with them. So he learned from the people too. It was a giving and take, you know, dialogue happening. So this is what you have to imagine what happened before the British colonialism. Because British colonialism, how it mostly worked was borders, as I have said, and identities through South Asia, like saying, this is Hindu, this is what defining Hinduism, making it a very static religion, making Islam, Muslims a static religion, and then telling people this is how you have to behave now, right? And so I have to think a little bit, sorry, 20th century, now we have established an Afghan central state with the help of the British, or actually by the British, and the Emir was their proxy. The Shah was their proxy. So it was their proxy. He did what they demanded because he would get money from them, he would get guns from them. And why did he do that? Because the British controlled already a lot of South Asia, and he could not, the British cut off a lot of trade routes. And when you cut off these trade routes and control them, people cannot eat. So we have an episode in the 18th and 19th century of starvation in Afghanistan, which is not discussed in literature a lot. But this is also how the British won the Second Anglo-Afghan War, is by starvation, which is cut off the trade routes. So the British were very, very powerful already at that time. So when he agreed on that, it was also to open the trade routes again, but also his personal interest as a person from the monarchy, as someone with power, with capital, right? So when you establish an Islamic, I'm not talking about Islam religiously or theologically, I'm talking just politically, how they used it. They introduced jizya, the tax that non-Muslims have to pay. So,
I'm sorry for interrupting your conversation. Just you mentioned the jizya, and I also read in some studies that at some point of the history, the Sikh and Hindus community had to wear a yellow turban.
Yeah.
So
that's a
could
good
you please talk about the jizya and how this kind of discriminative policy reinforced the stereotype and somehow impacted and affected their lives in Afghanistan in a negative way? And also please talk about them wearing turban and trying to make them more distinct from other ethnic groups.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Well, I forgot about this, right? So they introduced under Shah Abdurrahman Khan, who was responsible for the Hazari genocide as well, jizya. So they had to pay suddenly a tax others didn't have to pay. And also wear the yellow turbans, as you have mentioned. So Sikh, mostly Sikh men wear turbans. And because you could not directly differentiate from others, they said you have to wear yellow turban. And for the women, wear a yellow dupatta or chuni, like mark yourself, or a yellow dot, and also mark your stores. So suddenly you're not like everyone else moving around, but you're seen, right? This is what you're pointing out. You're made visible, but in a dehumanizing way. And this happened in the beginning of the 20th century. So, right, and then you mentioned the Habibullah, the son of Shah Abdurrahman. He took over when his father passed away. Habibullah wasn't that politically involved, but he kept on. And one of their restrictions was also that non-Muslims, non-Sunni Muslims are not allowed to celebrate openly their festivities. Usually you would have, in Hindu, but also in Sikh culture, religious cultures, when you or anyone, just everyone wants to celebrate their religious festivities very openly, very happy, and share with everyone, with the society. That wasn't allowed anymore. It's forbidden. You have to hide yourselves, and you cannot mark your dhamsalas, your gurdwaras and mandirs openly. Has to be hidden away. And only then we can tolerate you. And why tolerate and not deport them or take them out? Because some of the elite Hindus and Sikhs were bankers and traders. So they had the responsibility to finance the Afghan king, but also they could travel easily because they would speak multiple languages to South Asia and do exchanges. They had this position, and they would teach their own sons mostly this, and this is how they become in this profession very famous. There's also a group of Muslims in this. This group is usually sometimes called Tinko, who are very, financial literate and do this trade. So you cannot just kill off the communities because you rely on them too, but you don't want to give them too much privileges because you want to make sure they don't become powerful, right? So Habibullah, right, as you mentioned, there's a place near Jalabad, Sultanpur near Jalabad, where Guru Nanak, Baba Nanak was there. It's a very famous place. It's very beautiful. I have seen pictures of it. This is where Sikhs and Hindus go there to do pilgrim and visit, and it's a very holy place, a sacred place, but also just to enjoy themselves, have them festivities. And Habibullah closed it off because he said, I want to buy it. So first he went there and said to the Sikh community, I want to buy it. And the Sikhs answered, you cannot buy it because it doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to everyone. So you cannot buy this land. And he was so annoyed that he hired soldiers and just took the place to create his summer vacation place, and had soldiers around it. And obviously he wasn't there all year long. So when he was gone, people would pay the soldiers a little money to get in there to do their travels and their journeys, visit that place. Later, when his son Amanullah came, he changed a lot of politics in Afghanistan. He made it a secular state. That was his attempt. So no more religion as a state, but democracy and secularism and monarchy. And what he did, he abolished the jizya, he abolished the yellow turbans and marking everyone else. He opened the place up again for Sikhs and Hindus. And he also did some, he erased all the laws that were there to restrict everyone who's not Sunni Muslim, right? But he also had there were also issues with him because he wanted to introduce a dress code. And the dress code, in his idea, needed to be European modernity. So it meant for the Sikhs to put down the turban and cut their hair. So as Sikhs, we keep our hair long. We don't cut our hair ever. Since we are born, we don't cut our hair. But because Amanullah wanted European modernity, he said the turbans are abolished. And of course, there are other African groups who also have the turban as their identity. But he didn't last long enough to implement this policy. So he was gone. Then we had a little bit difficult times. I'm talking about the 1930s now. Nader came in, he took over, he established again Islam as the state religion in the 1930s. And he again introduced these discriminating laws against other religions. And then you have the 1940s, 1947, 1950. Along the 1950 mostly is when the Jewish community left Afghanistan for Israel. So because the state was becoming more repressive against minorities. And then you have, they told me in the 1970s, you still have this restricting laws. In the 1980s, you have a socialist party which abolished the restrictive laws. And before that, before the 1980s, when there was still this restrictive laws, paying jizya, etc., no more marking, no more yellow marking, but still, And the Hindus and Sikhs couldn't celebrate their religious festivities that openly. So they would go for the Vaisakhi festivals to Jalalabad, somewhere in a rural area, and celebrate there for 2 weeks, for 1 week together, and build, a campsite and have their religious festivities shared together and everything. And that was okay. And when the war continued and the war was in the rural area, and then the socialists came into power in the 1980s, they abolished restrictions for Hindus and Sikhs. And our communities could celebrate their Vaisakhi festivals and other religious festivals now in the city, very openly, didn't have to, hide themselves. And it's interesting because Barbara Kamal was personally responsible for allowing festivities again and erasing the laws or abolishing the laws that would not allow religious festivities. He was personally responsible for that, and in a backlash of other elites, he was called Hindu, but Hindu in a derogatory term. So all Hindu was in Afghanistan and is still among the Afghan diaspora a slur for my people. So you use it to dehumanize someone, although it just means Hindu, right? But it is the way people call you. Although the war was progressing in Afghanistan, the people in Kabul had many issues. For example, if you've been discriminated this long, from generations to generations, you cannot build up a lot of wealth. So you rely on your own community to work. So there was a lot of, only jobs available for 6x6 or Hindus. You stay in your community because everyone else said that if you eat with them or share something with them, then you're dirty or sinful. It's haram. So it's not everyone, but it is an experience that happened that Afghan Muslims considered the Hindus and Sikhs as less, didn't want to share food with them or a neighborhood. We have this issue like back in Afghanistan. In Kabul, every neighborhood would have a public oven where you could make your roti. People didn't have to have this at their homes. They had it at public and every neighborhood had it. And so when my mom went there as a child, as a teenager, and her sister, and you would have your dough ready, and they just have to put it in an oven and get it ready, they would refuse it because they say, oh, this is haram, we don't want that. The Hindus go away. You have issues like, I have heard issues like one time there was blood transfusion needed, and the Muslims in the hospitals would always say, we don't want Hindu blood, even though the blood was needed, or other things like this. They refuse. They say it's dirty, it's haram. They are without understanding why they are saying. And then you have the issues that everyday violence was very prevalent. When they go to public schools, I have many stories that they were beaten up. They were, the students were, hurt, and sometimes the teacher would be part of it, not do very rare instances where the teacher intervened, but mostly people wouldn't. They would hurt. And then, of course, you don't have a positive connection to education anymore, right? And the Afghan Hindus and Sikhs, they had their also private institutions, therefore, because the public school was very Islamic orientated, and I'm talking about political Islam. So they needed also their villages, and they had private schools. So you had, like, for teenagers, a double burden. They would go to public school, to Matta, and then they would also go to the religious school, which is a lot for teenagers. They should actually be free and have their own time. But to get some education and have a safe environment without being, bullied, without being targeted, then you have a lot of war coming to Kabul, right? And when the Taliban took over the first time, they also introduced the jizya, and they introduced the yellow markings again. So they asked them to wear yellow badges on their clothes to identify Sikhs and Hindus.
Yes. Could you please explain, Puja Jan, that was it in the first period of Taliban in the 90s, or are you talking about 90s when the Taliban take over the country? Okay.
Yeah, the first time in 1996, right?
During
and they had to
1996.
Right, and they had to wear yellow badges, were cut off from a lot, but like everyone, like they suffered like everyone else, but more so because their religion was then had to hide again. You cannot be seen as a Hindu or Sikh in the public praying, for example, in Europe, because it's forbidden under the Taliban. Then you have the Taliban taken out, and then you have the Islamic Republic. And by the way, the term Islamic Republic is also very, very there are a lot of conflicts and controversies, even among the ulama. I said sorry. So within the Muslim international community, there are a lot of controversies. Is Islamic Republic even a good concept or not? A lot of fights happening. So, and then anyway, they built this Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. And then I said they made the allies, the Western countries made a constitution which explicitly says that the religion of Afghanistan is Islam, and that only a Muslim can be a president, only a Muslim can be prime minister, only a Muslim can be a minister, which automatically means that everyone else who's different can never be a representative of the state. You have the issue, this has been going on for a very, very long time, that for the death, the Hindus and Sikhs cremate them, like burn the person, and that was not allowed under the Taliban and was very, very difficult and with a lot of restrictions during the Islamic Republic time. So what you had a lot of times is you had to transport the person who passed away, you had to transport them to India. And if you're not rich enough, that is an issue. If you don't have the money to transport your beloved to India where they can be cremated, that is very dehumanizing as well for the community.
In Kabul, why the Hindu and Sikh community couldn't cremate the body in Kabul?
Because the place where they used to cremate was closed off by the Taliban. Because in Islam, you're not allowed to do that. That is their saying. And it shouldn't happen. And it was a long issue also during the NATO time.
And it continued after 2021.
It was a big issue in 2008. You had issues, but also in 2006, like 2008 or 2009 is the time when the government finally secured a place for cremation. But it was until the end of the Islamic Republic very hard because other Afghans would be around and throw stones on the people and call them names. And while they are mourning or doing the last rites, right, giving the last honor to the people passed away, they were thrown with stones, with insults, etc. And this continued to the end.
I want to correct myself that I was mentioning 2001, not 2021. Of course,
but it went. Yeah.
The situation after 2021 is very obvious.
Yeah, it is obvious.
Put it on, like, I just want to conclude what we already talked that basically what I have learned from what you already said, that this Hindu and Sikh community and other ethnic group were basically facing discrimination, marginalization, and violence after the modern state, after 20th century, and the modern state established in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And of course, nobody is outsider, nobody is native, nobody is indigenous, and it was just what you already mentioned, how the formation of the modern state and how the state policy somehow try to categorize and classify the ethnic group so that they could consolidate the power and run the country. We already talked about the Hindu and Sikh community history in Afghanistan. You already mentioned about Kabul. You already mentioned Jalalabad. I already knew that they were living there. But could you please tell us in which region of Afghanistan were Sikh and Hindus historically concentrated?
Also, we have European accounts, colonial adventure books, etc.
Not just the modern Afghanistan, just talk in general.
In general, yeah,
Yeah,
we have.
in which region close to like current border of Afghanistan and inside Afghanistan, and in which region basically they historically live?
That I cannot tell you historically, because this is something I don't know. I don't have the data, but I can tell you from my family, my community, that there had Ghazni was a very important place, Jalabad, Kandahar, Mazar-e-Sharif, that were the cities that my family and extended family, etc., lived historically. And I'm mostly researching on this, which is closer to South Asia and Pakistan. I don't have history about Herat. For example, I don't have the data, but I know, like, for example, in Tehran, in Iran, there's a Sikh community, which is also old and historical community. So from my understanding is Ghazni was a very big city, right? And there happened a lot of migrations due to economy in the 1950s, 60s from Ghazni to Kabul, also from Charikar, which is a rural area north of Kabul, a lot of movement from there to Kabul, because Kabul became a very important trade center. And yeah, this is where a lot of Sikhs and Hindus also went, like other Muslims, like other Afghans also, a lot of migrated to Kabul from other cities. So that's what I can say, but I can tell you historically, I'm mostly involved in Bazazi shops. Bazazi is the textile. So from my family, a lot of people were involved in trading, like importing textiles and selling them in their shops in Kabul. And my other part of the family also did import-export, from bringing in goods from Tehran, for example. My grandfather went regularly by plane to Tehran, brought things there, brought things from Kabul to Tehran, like everyday things, dishes, dried fruit was very important as an export. And some families, mostly Jarikari families, were involved in agriculture and rice business. Yeah, and they're very like elite groups within the Hindu and Afghan Sikhs were in banking and financial sector. But the normal people were mostly, and that was like, they weren't really rich. Like, even if you're an export import, you just make a normal living. Like, you can pay your bills. That's all.
I just studied about the resettlement within the Afghanistan border, especially after 1930, that the local conflict was unbearable anymore, and like the local conflict, they lived in the villages and suburb areas, and they had lots of issue with other ethnic group, and then it caused them a resettlement kind of pattern, and they had to leave their villages, their houses, and the suburb areas of Afghanistan, and come to cities where discrimination were somehow bearable, and they were not facing that like very intense discrimination and violence. Uh, what are your findings? What your findings is about this resettlement pattern?
It really varies from region to region. It depends on the people you can talk to, I can talk to. So you would have people who say, claim that they were very well respected in the rural area, in the village. Then you have people who say, tell you the opposite. And then you have people who also have different experiences within the city of Kabul. And the difficulty is memory. talking, because we don't have written, we have a few books. I have one book found that talks a little bit about the Sikh and Hindu experience in the 1950s. So I rely on accounts of people. And as you know, memory is very tricky. Memory can be distorted. Sometimes people romanticize the past. They claim it was better than it was. Sometimes it's more awful than it was. And what you have to bring in is gender. Gender is extremely important in your work because men, like other Afghan men, had more mobility compared to women. Women had less mobility, so it depends on who you're asking. And so far, the literature on Afghan Hindu and Sikhs is mostly about men. So you have a different impression. But when you talk about women, you get a different story. So I can't tell you, you know. And then you have also the issue, I'm talking with people living here in the Western diaspora. And the violence here, the structural violence here is different.
We will
And
come to the diaspora issues, definitely. As we already talked, that there is not that much academic research on the Hindus and Sikh community of Afghanistan. And the very limited research that is available, they somehow consider them even as a single homogeneous group, like the Hindu communities of Afghanistan. And even in the legal document in Afghanistan, they are referred as Hindu. And I have some military service documents, basically during Amanullah Khan, I guess, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Or after that, everybody should do a kind of a period of military service. And in all of the Sikh men that done a military service, in their tarkhis, it's written Hindu. I couldn't find any Sikh man that done the military service. So how this kind of group them under the group them under the Hindu community, or just perceive them as a single homogeneous community? How this shaped the Sikh identity, and how it basically affected their visibility in society in Afghanistan, outside Afghanistan.
So this is a discourse which is very what is happening today again, to label Sikhs as Hindu. And there is a huge discourse in South Asia, particularly coming from India. And it's a difficult situation, but obviously Sikhs it's an own religion. It's not a Hindu religion. It's something very distinct, something with its own philosophy and teachings and principles. So my guess would be what you have discovered is a colonial record, because I also dig into the colonial archives, and what you would have is these records are written by people who are not educated enough to see the difference between people. So what you find from this time particularly is they don't understand the Sikh identity, and they group them as Muslims, and then only see the Hindu as different, or they say the Hindu and Sikhs are one category, like it was seen in the British colonial empire for a long time in South Asia, that they would see, even though Afghanistan was independent by that time, they still had the same categories of the empire, and the British would group Sikhs and Hindus as one, also with the Jains and with the Buddhists. And there was a long fight to emancipate from that, from liberate and say, no, we are our own religion. And now we see the discourse coming back again with the new movement in India saying, no, everyone is Hindu, and claiming different identities. So I'm guessing what you've seen, if you don't see Sikh men in these records, is mostly because the people who write the records are not educated enough. They're just some people, and they group most times during this time particular Sikh men as Muslims, don't understand it, or if they know, as Hindus.
Does the community try to challenge this homogenization, especially the of Afghanistan? In what way they try to challenge this homogenization?
Well, we have to see the difference between Indian Sikhs and Hindus, and the difference between Afghan Sikhs and Hindus is mostly that Hindus and Sikhs in Afghanistan also used to intermarry, and they are groups that just work together. You have a lot of Hindus in Afghanistan who also follow Baba Nanak, the first guru, or others. Even Hindu is a term which just describes a huge diversity of people. It's not the Hindu doesn't exist, similar like to how not the Muslim exists, right? Hindu is just a category, a label to say these are the others. And it was used during Mughal times to say these are non-Muslims. That is the most important issue of the category Hindu. It's just non-Muslim, it means. And because also due to this, it was used differently in Afghanistan, but because of the also intermarriage, shared culture, shared languages, and respect for each other, there was intermarried, and today they still stand in solidarity together. So we have Afghan, Hindu, and Sikhs communities. We have a global association that works closely together. And there is no need to say we're Sikhs, we are different. Obviously, when you have to fight your case for asylum application, you have to make your individual case and show that why and how you're discriminated. And the difference is that the Sikhs and the Hindus of the India, what is today India, have a different history together, because the Sikhs experienced a genocide that was mostly taken out by Hindus in 1984. And what the Hindus in Afghanistan experienced in the 1990s, just the Babri Masjid situation that escalated, is a pogrom of the Hindus. So the Muslims went in Kabul, the Afghans went, and after Hindus specifically, not Sikhs, and burned down their houses and their temples and everything. Like, this pogrom history is acknowledged in Germany, at least, that I can tell you. But there are different experiences, different forms of solidarity. So what you're referring to, the need to make yourself distinct as a Sikh, is something that comes now out of a discourse when especially Bollywood and the Hindi film industry and pop culture are claiming Sikh identity for themselves and trying to make them look like just one sort of Hindus. So this is a new discourse, and this is a discussion my generation has to have, but not my parents' generation, something we have to talk and come together.
So this is a very new topic, and on that time it was not something to discuss and to consciously think about it. I'm really refraining to somehow talk about Sikh and Hindus community of Afghanistan as someone I don't know anything about them as someone alien, but this question is just for more information and just to have more information. What's the dominant language among the Sikh and Hindus communities? And which language they do speak? And how the language shape their cultural identity and sense of belonging?
Yes. Well, this is a question I spent many months in archives. So,
Interesting.
so what the issue is with naming languages, you know, when we say this language is this and is different from another language and is very distinct. It is, again, a question of identity, but that's not how languages, religions, cultures work. They intermingle, people meet. You know, I pick up a word from you, you pick up a word from me. They're syncretic. They always move, they always develop, right? But I can tell you this much is that the issue with naming my language, which is Punjabi, but officially named as Hindko or Sheraki or Multani in Kurd records, is a categorization that came from the British. So the British first needed to introduce and categorize languages because that's how their empire works, right? Because languages are never pure. They are always mixed, they always develop, they always change. And the British introduced these categories. And what I can tell you is my parents, they speak Persian outside the house. The community language is Punjabi or Hindko, which is close to the religious language. In Sikhi, the religious language is, it is Punjabi, but Sikh religion is very diverse. It has also Arabic in it. It also has Persian in it. It also has mostly Braj in it. It is a language which is close to Hindustani. And my parents' generation, they use this language in the home. It is different from what is standardized Punjabi in India. I cannot understand the people from India, North India. When we speak Punjabi, it's very, very difficult, very different. But it's not Persian, right? You wouldn't understand me. But yeah, this is how I grew up, and my parents decided that, like also a lot of my parents' generation, we don't need Persian, so we kept this language. So I don't speak Persian, but I speak Punjabi, my first language, my language I interact within the family. And this also allowed me very easily to speak Hindustani, to speak Urdu, to speak Hindi, and watch Hindi movies, refer to Hindi cinema, you know, and also see my religion in Hindi cinema or Punjabi movies nowadays because they have a lot of Sikh representation. So this is one, but obviously I have a generational gap with my parents who listen to old Persian songs. What was his name? This famous Persian singer.
There are lots of famous Persian
Yeah,
singers.
I forgot his name. I'm sorry. He's very, very famous, and they love him and they listen. And
Maybe it could be Ahmad Zair.
yeah, yes, obviously. So I don't understand it. They understand it. They love. It's on weddings. We have a mixture of new Punjabi music, pop culture Punjabi music, old Hindi songs, and Persian music. At weddings, family gatherings, it's a mixture of these languages.
Yeah, that's interesting. Coming slowly to the uh, max to the mass exodus from Afghanistan. As you know, for most people of Afghanistan, when life becomes very unbearable, especially during war or persecution, basically for them the easiest escape routes were usually Pakistan or Iran, because people could cross the border without official document. They could rely on informal routes, even some of them have family there in Iran or Pakistan. What, like, so they could easily escape from the war and violence. How was this for Sikh and Hindus community? Was it easy for them to escape when their life was under threat and under risk, like other people from Afghanistan, other ethnic group when the civil war started, and before that, before the political unrest, like when during the political unrest and civil war, they could easily leave the country and then go to Iran and Pakistan, seek refuge. How was it for Sikh and Hindus community? How was their experience? How is their experience? Because you already talked with lots of Sikh and Hindus community of Afghanistan, the diaspora community. What they tell about their migration experience and when they had to leave the country.
Yes, so I think this is a question a lot has to do more with class and having money to flee. So you obviously know that if you have money and network, you can flee much earlier than later, right? So the first people who started to leave were in the 1980s, right? And back then I'm mostly talking about the people in Kabul. You didn't know how the war would go. The war wasn't in the capital yet, right? People didn't know. And the people who had money within the Afghan Sikh and Hindu community, they left earlier, right? And other Afghans too, because who has the money, who has the routes, who has the connections, and usually people from the upper class, from the elites, the monarchs, they have enough money. They just leave, right? And other people need to gather their money. There were a lot of people obviously hoping. As you know, it's a difficult time to talk about. But when you talk with people, anyone, not only Afghan Sikhs, just anyone, there was a lot of hope that things will get better. A lot of like, no, we stay, even when the rockets were falling on Kabul. And this is my family's history. Like parts of our communities, they already left. But other parts, like my family, they were still hoping, even though the rockets were falling down, left, right, and front, and there was machine guns and the Kalashnikovs, and there was still hope, maybe, And it took a while for my family to gather and then say, okay, we hope this war will end and we can come back, right? But eventually they left, and it was not easy because you wouldn't get the passports. So you need to cross international borders, Pakistan, and they didn't go to Iran because it's a Muslim country again. You can't go there. You can't stay in Pakistan because it's also a Muslim country, and both Iran and Pakistan are known for persecuting minorities and not accepting others.
That's what exactly I was meant that, because with Iran, they are basically a majority Shia country, and they speak Persian, and with Pakistan, they also most of the peoples there are Muslims, so for the Muslim of Afghanistan, it could be a bit easier.
Yeah.
And you already told that in order to leave the country, ethnicity, religion is not that important. It's about the money, the resources.
Yeah.
The resources to have to somehow leave the country in time of the crisis.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Yeah, right. Like to leave, you need mostly money.
Yeah.
But where you go now depends, right? So you can't go to Iran, known for persecuting minorities. Pakistan, also known to persecute minorities, not allowing minorities to live. So the only way was India, and India issued visas. But to receive a visa, you needed a passport. And that were a lot of people had issues receiving a passport because a lot of people wanted to leave. And the Afghan bureaucrats, like there was too much demand, right? So they would give passports to people who paid. We would call it corruption, right? They took money, bribery, like these things happened. So people stayed also, but other people too had got their passport and then had a visa from India. The Indian embassy gave it out to, as far as I know, they gave it out easily to Sikhs and Hindus. It wasn't like a lot of, process. It was like relatively easy giving. And obviously you had to go to India. So you have now in India, when you arrived in the 1980s, in 1984, I have a family that arrived in 1984 in Delhi, in New Delhi. There was this persecution and genocide of Sikhs happening. So unfortunately, when they arrived, they were targeted by a mob and experienced lots of violence there. So when you received word that this is the state, what is happening in Delhi right now, my family decided to wait more until things would come down, until you hear a word that it is better, you can live there now. And they waited until the 1990s, and this is when parts of my family left then to New Delhi after the genocide, after it calmed down, and lived through a lot of poverty, obviously, because the Indian nation state is not providing. So you rely on people giving you money, building support networks, and also let me think about that. But I think the issue was mostly because of the violence against Sikhs. Some people went to New Delhi but couldn't survive there. So you have also people like going back and then going for Europe because there's no other way, right? And from my understanding is that knowing there's violence in Iran waiting for them, there's violence in Pakistan, and then there's violence in India, and you didn't know, the only way was to go to Europe, which sounded a little bit safer than other countries. Right? And I think my family's road was like, should we go to India? No, we can't. We have to. And then going to Europe, deciding to go to Europe.
Since you already said that you already talked with the diaspora community of Afghanistan here in Germany and maybe in any other country, how well connected are they with other ethnic group coming from Afghanistan? Because we have a huge diaspora community, even in Germany and across Europe. How well connected they are, like, are they really engaged in the diaspora discussion here in Germany or at any other European country? How is their relationship?
So we are a big community, we are a really huge diaspora. I have family in Belgium, in Austria, in London mostly. So we have a lot of going on with ourselves, our families already. And then the question is, obviously, when we arrived in Germany, there was a lot of connections with other Afghans because you lived in the same home. You were put by the state into a home where you collectively had to live and you talk to each other. But as I mentioned, there was still prejudice, there was still slurs and racism, basically, you could say it, happening. So there was this also decision, okay, let's not interact with other Afghans too much because this issue is still going on. It's still, but it's also like, I don't know, I don't see a need to connect with the other Afghan because you're constantly overlooked. Remember when in Bonn, the NATO and the Allies decided for a new Afghan government as nation state in 2001, in December 2001 and 2004, they didn't invite any Afghan Hindus and Sikhs to the table. You're constantly, so why would you, at some point you're like, I don't know. And this is also my personal experience, is I'm still looked down. Like I'm not seen on the same level as a human, not considered. I have to say, I'm still asked if I want to convert to Islam, So it makes it hard, because when someone approaches me and asks me to convert to their religion, I'm like, do you even see me on the same level? If I'm not converting to your religion, do we talk about the same level of respect, right? And I don't see a need to do this. Of course, there are individuals like me, but also my cousins or those who go out with other Afghans, partying, meeting on conferences, talking, having friendly connections, being friends, but not as a community, I would say. No.
I'm just not about talking about like social interaction, attending in social gatherings, but I'm talking about big political event like Bonn Conference, like 2001, and all these, I would say, important gatherings, political gatherings that are organized in several places. Does the Sikh and Hindus community are invited, or there is do they ask Sikh and Hindu communities to send a representative or to join, or there is any effort to include you in the events, political events, and important conferences about Afghanistan, and about making decision about the future of Afghanistan?
Not that I know of. It could be that some people have been invited and the invitation didn't reach me. Sometimes it happens, It has changed with our generation, that I'm invited to conferences with other Afghans to talk about this. I know that in the past few years of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan, there was one seat for Afghan and Sikhs reserved for Afghan and Hindu Sikhs in the parliament. And they had a political delegation in Afghanistan, but they were attacked. There was a bomb attack on them, and they were killed off, the political delegation, I think in 2018 in Jalalabad. Right? And every time you would have in Afghanistan, but this is a historical continuity, every time you would have in Afghanistan someone from the Hindu Sikh community becoming political and knowing, like, they would get killed, they would get abducted. And this happened continuously through Afghan history. So it is like there are a lot of attacks on individuals. What we read and what we hear are attacks on a group or on a gurdwara, but there's a lot of attacks on individuals who are targeted, who are abducted when they raise their voice. And no, as far as I know, like the Bonn conference, there was no invitation for the Afghan diaspora, etc., and not recognized even as Afghans. So a lot of time you would have obviously the issue to prove you're Afghan, and how do you prove that? A lot of people just don't see you.
That right? You're from Afghanistan, so you have to have a kind of document, or so. I don't know how they want to prove you that you're from Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Now we have some questions that coming from the audience one
Okay.
person asked that why as Afghanistan consistently focused on nation building and institutions based on it and consequently failed to establish a stable state. A long question.
Yeah. Why do you do nation building is because you want to have power. Like, that's it. Like, why else do you need nation states? It's because you need to concentrate power within a group. I mean, a lot of people talk about nation states as a way to live together as a society, to make rules and laws so we could live peacefully. But from my understanding, the idea of nation state in South Asia or Asia is very European in this sense as we know it. And why does it fail again and again? Well, one issue was obviously Afghanistan is too diverse, which is good, because if the institutions fail, I mean, it sounds sometimes really sad, but it's a good thing because we're too diverse and we resist being Pashtunized, right? They try to make Pashto like the one language every Afghan has to speak and everyone has to be a Pashtun. And we resisted. We maintained our diversity, which also means we maintained our dignity. This is something
Identity.
And
And
identity.
identity.
But dignity, right? This is something Europe could not do. Look at Germany, for example. It's not that diverse as it used to be. Like you have one German language everyone speaks, but there are very different dialects which are gone. They have different German traditions, cultures. They are all gone nowadays. Germany is mostly Lederhosen and Bratwurst and Oktoberfest. So we resist it. I think it's good.
With what you have said, I really want to know if you want to share your experience, and since you already had done a very extensive research on the diaspora community of Afghanistan, especially the Sikh and Hindu communities, like what's home for you?
Sorry?
What's home for you? How do you or the Hindu and Sikh community like somehow build the narrative of belonging to Afghanistan?
Yeah, this is I think a question we all have to ask ourselves, right? What is home? And there are many songs about Vatan, about pride and etc. There's a very funny, very funny discourse in the diaspora about home. You know, like people of color, migrated people in the West, in the diaspora talk about home differently compared to the people who are in the home country. Sometimes very funny, very diverse. I can tell you that maybe home is not, it's very cliche, but maybe home is not a specific nation state, but home is where my people are. Home is where my heart is. That is home. And it can be wherever I go with my heart. You know, home is obviously for me my Gurdwara in Stuttgart, the Dharamsala of the Afghan Sikh community. That is home because I grew up with all the people around there. Home is obviously my parents' place, you know, because this is my family. Home is, but also when I go to New Delhi or go to Punjab because there are very important big Dharamsalas and I'm a Sikh. And I can feel when I visit these places, I can feel being at home. I can feel like, oh, this is where my heart feels good, right? So home is where my heart is, where my people are, where I can hear what is good for my humanity, for my human heart, where I can meet people on the same level.
There is still a little hope alive. I would like to end this conversation with this question that what we can do, what strategy can be implemented to support the Hindu and the Sikh and Hindu community of Afghanistan, and how together we can their demographic presence can be restored and strength. Do you think there is something still that we can do to do it? Do we still have the possibility, the hope, the energy, and the intention to do it? And if yes, how we can do it?
This is a question I always get. My question is, why do we need to? What is the purpose? What is your intention behind it? What is your dream behind it? Saying Afghans in the West, they need all to come together. But for what purpose? Where do you want to go with me? Like, let's say you say, how can I support you, Puja? And I'm like, yeah, but where are we going? What is your intention? And I feel like a lot of people, when they ask me, how can I support you? They don't know what it means. I'm like, I don't know what it means. Say, I want to support you, but okay, where are we going? Where is this journey going?
I just don't want to have top-down kind of look, but I'm also from a minority religious group.
Yeah.
I was just saying that what we can do, like as
but what do you want to do
as a community from Afghanistan?
Yeah, but what do you want to do? Maybe this is not because this question, if I understand it correctly, is rebuilding Afghanness. We have to come together because we're Afghans. But maybe this is a time where we have to find new ways to relate to each other. Everything's constantly moving, everything is changing constantly, and we're building new alliances always. We find different friends, we find different ways, and maybe what it means to when you come to me and say, how can I support you? I can tell, yeah, maybe do you have some Afghan music I haven't listened to for a while? Maybe, but it's also, how can I support you? It's not a one way, because what I'm telling you is also Afghan history. It's also your part of it too, because I'm trying to give Afghanistan a complicated history, not this little one. I want to say Afghanistan is not only war and violence. No, it's a beautiful region. It has given people so many philosophies, so many Sufi poetry. It's a celebration of life. Let's talk about that. How can we support each other and create a new Afghanistan idea?
And that is a beautiful one. That is a beautiful idea, because not everybody living in Afghanistan consider themselves Afghan.
Yeah.
There are peoples, including myself, think that Afghan is like referring to a specific ethnic group, and not everybody agree to consider themselves as Afghan.
But let's leave out Afghan, and let's relate to each other through stories. Which stories did you grow up with? Which stories did I grow up with? I grew up with the stories of the three wise men who had blindfolded and touched an elephant. That's a story a lot of people of us know. We grew up with these stories, so let's relate that way.
Of course. Thank you so much, Puja Jan. It was so nice to have you. Thank you so much for sharing a lot from the in-depth academic research to your personal story. It was so nice to have you, and I enjoyed from every bit of this program. It was such an honor and pleasure to have you today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for talking with me.
Thank you so much. I don't really know how to close the program. Can someone talk from the technical part?
Yeah, I'm now ending the program. Thanks from both of you, and yeah, hopefully we have uh, Miss Matta in our next interviews and hear
That would be
more.
great. If you agree to,
Yeah,
if you agree to come again.
yeah. I appreciate from your accepting your invitation. Hopefully we meet you
And
again.
this, I want to thank you, everyone watching our program in the YouTube. You can subscribe the YouTube channel, and we will continue our discussion with different topic, and we may have Mr. Puja again.
Thank you. That's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, and have a good night, everyone.